Wapanan da, thank you for joining me once again today. As I explained last week, we are keeping a very close watch on the public health situation following the emergence of the new Omicron variant. That variant is here in Wales and it is already spreading. We have moved from a 3-week to a 1-week review of the coronavirus regulations so that we have the right measures in place to keep Wales safe. I plan to update you today about the very latest situation and the decisions the Cabinet here in the Welsh Government has taken to keep everyone safe this Christmas. Now, at the moment, the vast majority of coronavirus infections in Wales are caused by the Delta variant. We're still dealing with the Delta wave in Wales. That's the form of coronavirus which caused the large peak of cases earlier in the autumn. Now, the rate remains high across Wales, but it is high and stable at around 500 cases per 100,000 people. And we believe that the Delta form of coronavirus will continue to be the main cause of infections in Wales up to Christmas. But this is the calm before the storm. We are seeing cases of Omicron increasing every day in Wales and across the United Kingdom. There are around 100 confirmed cases in Wales, and they are to be found in every health board area. By the end of December, it will be the dominant form of the virus in the United Kingdom. Now, this is a very fast-moving form which is easily transmitted from person to person. It has spread rapidly throughout England and Scotland. And because of how easily Omicron is transmitted and its ability to infect large numbers of people, we know that this could translate into large numbers of people being admitted to hospital. We're already seeing increases in the number of people in hospital with COVID-19 in London, and we have to be prepared for the same thing to happen here too. That is why the decisions made by the Cabinet yesterday are designed to keep us safe up to Christmas while Delta is still dominant, and then to put in place stronger measures to protect us after the Christmas period when we have to prepare for a large wave of infections. Now, nobody wants to be ill at Christmas. So today we're setting out new guidance and strong advice to help keep us all safe and well. This is a virus that thrives on human contact. Every time we meet with other people, there is an opportunity for the virus to spread and for us to catch it. The Omicron variant particularly likes gatherings and enclosed spaces where it can move easily from person to person. So if you can, please think about reducing the number of people you meet, especially if you are seeing older or more vulnerable people over Christmas. And to stay safe in the run up to Christmas, we strongly advise everyone to follow these measures to stay safe. Get vaccinated, the single most important thing that you can do. When you get your booster appointment, please make that your top priority for that day. If you're going out, when Christmas shopping or visiting people, flow before you go. Take a lateral flow test, and of course, if it's positive, then don't go out at all. Remember that meeting outdoors is better than meeting indoors. And if you are meeting indoors, then make sure that it's well ventilated. And spread out your socialising. If you are seeing family and friends, then try not to see them all together in one go. And don't forget about those basic things the things we've all learned to do. Keeping a social distance, wearing a face covering, washing our hands. Those are the things that, taken together and done by everybody, make a real difference. Now, some places and some people are especially vulnerable to this disease, and updated guidance about care home visiting will be published before the end of this week. The Chief Medical Officer will be writing to everybody on the shielding list about the steps that they can take to protect themselves in the Omicron context. And we will be changing the law to make it clear that people must work from home wherever we can. This year, without any doubt at all, a smaller Christmas will be a safer Christmas. Now, because we expect cases of Omicron to increase rapidly after Christmas, we will introduce new protective measures on the 27th of December to help control its rapid spread and to prevent large numbers of people from needing hospital care. We'll be drawing on elements of the Alert Level 2 regime, and many of those will be familiar to you because they were used to keep businesses open in a safe way earlier in the pandemic. Shops, workplaces and businesses will reopen here in Wales after Christmas, but with those new protections in place. There will be a strengthened set of reasonable measures, which will include a return to the 2-metre rule for social distancing. It means that shops, businesses and workplaces will need to make some extra changes to the way they operate, putting in place measures such as one-way systems and physical barriers. Nightclubs will close from the 27th of December, and we are having further discussions with sector representatives or public health advisors and sporting bodies about major events which are planned in the post-Christmas period. For all of those reasons, financial support of up to £60 million will now be newly made available to businesses materially affected by these new restrictions. And we're working with partners about how that support can most effectively be delivered, and further details about the practicalities of it will be available as quickly as possible. But our ability to provide and sustain longer-term economic support during this new wave of what is an ongoing public health emergency is severely constrained by the current position of the UK Treasury and its refusal to open vital support schemes such as furlough. These schemes should be available for all nations when they are needed, and not just at the point when restrictions are introduced in England. Now, we have been able to manage coronavirus here in Wales with the lowest level of restrictions in place for the last 6 months. And we had all hoped for a new year in which the pandemic would become a fading memory. But sadly, Omicron poses a new threat to our health and to our safety. It is the most serious development in the pandemic to date, and it's one that we must take seriously and put in place proportionate measures to protect people's lives and livelihoods. As ever, we have learnt that together we can keep Wales safe. Let me end by wishing everyone a happy and, above all, a safe Christmas. And on your behalf, I want to thank everyone who will be working this Christmas to keep the rest of us safe, especially those who have had to cancel their own plans to work in the vaccination centres to increase our protection against this awful virus. Nadolig llawen I chi gyd, a diolch o galon I chi gyd hefyd. I'll, as usual, take questions next, and as ever, all the answers will be broadcast on the Welsh Government's own social media channels. First today, over to Jenny Rees at BBC Wales.
Thank you. Good afternoon. You've talked about warning that half the population could fall ill. So given that, what conversations have been had about essential services, whether that's NHS, local authorities, or even perhaps other 999 services, about their resilience to maintain services, and are there functions you're particularly concerned about? If I could have that answer in Welsh as well, please.
Thank you, Jenny. Well, I chaired the Wales Resilience Forum on Thursday of this week, and that brought together all those major interests from the health service, from local government, from the police and others to share information about how prepared we are in Wales for the many different anxieties that there are this winter. You know, I won't disguise from anybody the concerns that were expressed there about the way in which the Omicron variant could have a major impact on the number of people available to be in the workplace. If this is going to spread in the way that some of the models suggest, then the people we rely on to look after us in an emergency will themselves be affected by it. So I can give everybody an assurance that all those services are planning very hard themselves and working with others to put in place whatever measures will be needed to provide a continuity of service to people here in Wales. If we do see that very rapid increase and very steep increase in the number of people falling ill from the Omicron variant in January, then that will have an impact on our public services. It's inescapable, but everything is being done to prepare for that as best we possibly can. Wel, ges I y cyfle ar dydd Iau I gydeirio y fforwm sy'n dod dy gilydd pobl ar draws y gwasanaethau cyhoeddus yma yng Nghymru o'r maes iechyd, o'r awdurdodau lleol, y heddlu ac yn y blaen. Ac y pwrpas y fforwm yw I rannu wybodaeth a cynllunio dy gilydd ac I wynebu y sialens fwyaf sydd da ni yn y gaia yng Nghymru. Os bydd yr amrywiolyn Omicron yn dod ato ni mewn ton, fel mae rai bobl yn disgwyl, mae hwnna yn mynd I cael effaith ar angwasanaethau cyhoeddus, achos bydd pobl sy'n gweithio yn y maes iechyd neu gofal cymdeithasol ac yn y blaen, wel, mae nifer ohonyn nhw yn mynd I cwmpo'n dost oherwydd amrywiolyn newydd. Ond pwrpas y fforwm yw I cynllunio am y dyfodol, a dyna beth oedd bobl yn neud, a mae gwasanaethau yma yng Nghymru yn wneud popeth maen nhw yn gallu wneud I paratoi I gweithio gyda gilydd, I cadw pethau yn mynd yn mis Ionar, pan bydd y system I gyd dan straen.
Given that, given the rhetoric that's being used, what stopped you going further today? I mean, does it simply boil down to not having the financial resources there to compensate businesses?
Well, I think there are two parts to answer that question, Jenny. First of all, as I said in my opening remarks, you know, it is important to be proportionate to the position that we see, and for the few days ahead to Christmas, we believe that the Delta variant will continue to be the dominant variant here in Wales. The number has been remarkably stable over the last 7 days, and the number of people in hospital because of coronavirus has actually drifted further down over that 7 days. You know, not sharply, but always in that direction. And in those circumstances, provided people are prepared to do those simple things that I outlined in our own daily lives, we think that we can continue with more or less the current level of restrictions up to Christmas. But behind us, we see the storm gathering. We see what is happening in Scotland, We see what is happening in London, and we know that that is coming to Wales. That is why we are putting measures in place now for immediately after Christmas to give those businesses time to prepare and to allow them to open in a way that we think will be safe for their workers and their customers and will help us to deal with the oncoming rush of coronavirus. That we can afford. We are finding £60 million to afford that level of restriction. Were more to be needed, that can only be done with the assistance of the Treasury in London. Only they have the firepower to be able to mount a financial support package if we have to go beyond what we have today. And the point I was making, and the point I've made repeatedly to UK ministers, is that the current system simply isn't fair. If UK government ministers acting for England decide to take further measures, the Treasury will be there to support them. If I were to decide, or the First Minister of Scotland or Northern Ireland were to decide, there's no such guarantee. And given that we are dealing with people's lives and public health, that is simply not the way the system ought to operate.
If I could have that in Welsh as well, please.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Wel, be ni'n neud I trial I cynllunio am y sefyllfa ni'n wynebu heddi, pan mae nifer o bobl sy'n cwmpo'n dost yn dal I fod pobl sy'n dioddau o'r amrywiolyn Delta. Mae nifer o bobl sy'n cwmpo'n dost ddim wedi cynyddu dros yr wythnos diwetha, a mae nifer o bobl yn ysbytau yn dod lawr peth bach bron bob dydd. Yn y cyd-destun hynny, penderfyniadau y cabinet oedd I cadw Gymru yn y lle ble ni wedi bod dros yr wythnosau diwetha. Ond tu ôl ni, ni'n gallu weld yr amrywiolyn Omicron yn dod ato ni. Ni'n weld beth sydd wedi digwydd yn barod yn Llundain ac yn yr Alban, a ni'n gwybod mae hwnna yn dod ato ni yng Nghymru. Dyna pam ni wedi wneud y penderfyniadau nawr I ail agor siapiau, busnesau, swyddfeydd ac yn y blaen mewn ffordd wahanol ar ôl y Nadolig I gadw bobl yn ddiogel. Gyda beth ni wedi penderfynu ar hyn o bryd, mae digon o arian da ni, 60 miliwn o bunnoedd ni wedi rhoi ar y bwrdd I helpu busnesau yn y cyd-destun newydd ar ôl y Nadolig. Os bydd rhaid I ni wneud fwy na hynny, yr unig ffordd I affordio fwy na hynny yw trwy'r cymorth y Trysorlus yn San Steffan. Ac a hyn o bryd, mae'r system ddim yn deg I ni yma yng Nghymru neu yn yr Alban neu yn Gogledd Iwerddon hefyd. Os mae gweinidogion yn San Steffan yn wneud penderfyniadau, bydd y Trysorlus yn tu ôl nhw ac yn rhoi arian iddyn nhw I wneud be mae nhw'n eisiau wneud I ddiogelu bobl. Os ni'n eisiau wneud yr un penderfyniadau fan hyn, bydd yr arian yna ddim ar gael. Mae hwnna ddim yn deg, a dyna'r pwynt dwi wedi rhoi i'r gweinidogion yn San Steffan sawl waith dros yr wythnos diwetha. Jenny, thank you very much. Over to Adrian Masters at ITV Wales.
Thank you, First Minister. Could you say a little more about what the situation is for people who were shielding in earlier stages of the pandemic? Can you give some indication of the kind of advice you're going to be giving to them, because they will be very anxious, as I'm sure you're aware. For instance, will aspects of the shielding regime, things like priority deliveries from supermarkets, be reintroduced? And while you're at it, could you clarify, please, how many jabs they should have had or should be expecting to have? Is it 3 or 4?
Adrian, thank you very much. So the Chief Medical Officer will be writing out again to everybody on the shielding list. We've sustained the shielding list. We've kept it a live list here in Wales, and the Chief Medical Officer has written out to people on a number of occasions over the whole of the pandemic, and I know that people have really appreciated having the clarity of the advice that Dr. Atherton has been able to provide to them. So it will be his advice in his clinical capacity. I don't believe that he will be advising people to go back to the original shielding regime, but he will be giving people the best advice as to how they can keep themselves safe in the context of the Omicron variant. And it'll be the sort of practical advice that he's provided on previous occasions. I don't think there is a single answer to how many injections people should have had, because it does depend upon the nature of people's condition. For the majority of people, the considerable majority of people on the shielding list, the answer would be 3, 2 original doses and a booster vaccination. And for most of them, they should have had that now. There will be some other people with very particular underlying health conditions where that regime will have had to have been negotiated with their own clinician. So that, there will be some cases where that will not be true, but for the bulk of people on the shielding list, the 2 original vaccinations plus the booster would be, I would think, what they would expect to have.
Thank you. I know a number of viewers that have contacted us will be very glad to hear that advice. Can I also ask you then about the use of COVID passes? Over the last couple of months, you've said that their use was to keep nightclubs open. Now that you're planning to close nightclubs, does that suggest that you think that COVID passes are not effective?
No, I think COVID passes have been very effective, and they have helped a number of settings to stay open or events to take place that otherwise might not have been possible. But in the changing context of Omicron, and we've seen evidence in other parts of the world at just how it spreads in those enclosed settings and what super spreader events those can be. A single individual able to infect very large numbers of other people at a single event. Nightclubs were the last places to reopen as we came down the levels, and I don't think it can honestly be a surprise that as we need to begin to reinforce the protections that are there for people in Wales, that they are amongst the first places that we have to steer people clear of in order to avoid the risks that Omicron will pose. So it's the new context that means we feel that they have to close, rather than because we think passes have not been effective. If we were only dealing with Delta, then I think staying open with the pass would be the path that we were on. Sadly, that the sky has darkened with the new variant that we know is coming our way. Thank you, Adrian, to Bronwyn Weatherby at PA.
Nawr, First Minister. The announcements that nightclubs are to be closed down after Christmas, including on New Year's Eve, has been described by nightclub owners as a virtue signalling political decision. I'd like to get your response to that, and also to the suggestion that this move punishes the people, for example, younger people, that the virus affects the least.
Well, clearly I don't agree that it's anything at all to do with virtue signalling. It is about protecting the health of people who otherwise would be putting themselves in harm's way. And it really is as simple as that. It is a public health decision and nothing else. I think it's very interesting, the point about younger people. And, I think about that quite a lot. But if you look at London and you look to see where the most rapid growth has been in the Omicron variant, it has been in people in their 20s and their 30s. So while I'm always keen to think carefully about the differential impact that decisions have on different parts of the population, in this case, I think you could say that we are discriminating in favour of younger people by taking action in a context where they are most likely to go, against a background of information about the way in which Omicron is particularly being a serious attack rate amongst those younger groups.
Okay, diolch. And there are a lot of people right now really concerned about their livelihoods in the coming months, as you can imagine, not just those who own venues and work in the hospitality sector, but other sectors like the wedding industry and beauty industry, and many more. What reassurances can you give them that they will be compensated if their businesses are affected by restrictions? And is the 60 million today enough to cover those potential financial impacts?
Well, the £60 million is what we have set aside for the month of January. And on the basis of the decisions we've made so far, we think that that will be sufficient to cover the sorts of costs that the Welsh Government has always been able to cover. We have never been able to cover the cost of wages of people whose livelihoods are temporarily interrupted by actions that are necessary to protect people from coronavirus. That has always been the responsibility of the UK government through the furlough scheme and the self-employed scheme that they have mounted. And, I'll say again today, as I've said every time, that I want to recognise the enormous effort the Treasury made in finding the funding to put those schemes in place. They really did matter here in Wales. But if we are facing a wave, as described to us, not just by our own Chief Medical Officer, but by the Chief Scientific Officer and Chief Medical Officer for the UK government, then I think there is a responsibility on the UK Treasury to come forward and make it clear that there will be support for people if those public health measures are needed. So if we needed to do more of the sort, Bronwyn, that you described, it would have to be with the power of the Treasury behind us. We've not had those indications so far, despite having made the case very vigorously, and it's not a case just I have been making. I know that the First Minister of Northern Ireland and of Scotland have made the case as well, with a Chancellor on his way back from California. Let's hope that that will mark a moment when the UK Treasury comes in behind the public health measures that may now be needed.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Over to Rupert Evelyn at ITN. Maybe Rupert having difficulty in coming through to us, in which case we'll go to Channel 4. Oh, no, Rupert has arrived.
Is Rupert there? Can I?
Sorry,
No, you can't hear Rupert.
no, Kemi, Rupert, I've just appeared on the screen. Should we go back one step and see if he's still there?
No problem.
I am here. Apologies,
There we
but my internet connection is unstable. So I'll try and throw this in quickly ahead of my colleague at Channel 4, Kemi. Just a quick question, First Minister. There seems to be a narrative that you're putting out there that suggests that you can't act because the UK Treasury isn't acting at the moment. The Chancellor said recently you can have, through the block grant, an extra £2.5 billion a year, fundamentally to do with what you wish. You do have the money, but you're blaming it on the Treasury.
No, really, that isn't an argument that stacks up to examination at all. The £2.5 million is for all the other things that we need to do. Rebuilding the NHS in the post-pandemic period, making sure that our children in schools have the extra support they need to prepare for examinations when their education has been so disrupted, to house homeless people who otherwise would be on the streets in a public health emergency. The additional funding, and it's only our share of funding that has already gone for similar purposes in England, is to make sure that those mainstream activities of government can be sustained here in Wales. What we're talking about is the additional and extraordinary measures that may be needed in facing the Omicron onslaught. And the point I make, and I just make it again, is that it is not fair that UK ministers are able to act when they think they need to act because the Treasury will be there to support them, whereas the devolved governments have to wait until English ministers decide before the money comes to us, when we may need to make different sorts of decisions to different sort of timetables, we ought to have the same power of initiative as UK ministers have when we are all of us acting in order to protect our populations in a public health emergency. I seem to have lost Rupert off the screen, so I'm going to move. I'm going to go back to Kemi at Channel 4.
Thank you, First Minister. Strong words for the UK Treasury. What is the very latest they have told you? Where are those negotiations? What is their response to your request? And look, businesses are desperate. We know that. If you don't get what you want out of the Treasury, you're going to have to look at your 60 million cap and potentially increase it, aren't you?
Kemi, thank you very much. So I last had an opportunity to discuss this with UK ministers on Wednesday evening. At that point, the Treasury said that while it was providing funds to deal with the costs of the accelerated vaccination programme, it had no current plans for further support for the economy in the context of coronavirus. And, you know, I said that I thought that that was disappointing and unfair, but that was the position that the Treasury maintained. You know, I will go on making the case, and I've no doubt that some UK ministers will also be making the case to the Treasury to provide funding for the different actions that they may need to take as the Omicron impact intensifies. The £60 million for the month of January is sufficient, as we calculate it, to assist businesses with the level of new protections that we have announced. It's only if we need to go beyond that that our own resources will be insufficient to be able to help businesses with the costs and the anxieties that they absolutely understandably are expressing. So for the things that we have decided, we think we have enough to help. It's what lies beyond that that we continue to be in a debate with the UK government.
Thank you, First Minister. And just something on the modelling, if you don't mind as well. When does your modelling show that Omicron will be the main strain in Wales? And do you envisage that you are going to have to introduce more level 2 restrictions, for example, the rule of 6?
Thank you. So our modelling shows that the Omicron variant is already the dominant variant in some parts of the United Kingdom. It's already the dominant variant in London and will be the dominant variant on a UK basis by the end of December. We may be a few days behind that in Wales because of the way the variant is moving from east to west, but it will be the dominant variant in Wales as well in January. What the current model shows, but it's really important to say, isn't it, that the model is being refined every day as new information becomes available. It shows a very rapid and a very steep rise in January, but it also shows that the variant may decline reasonably sharply as well, more sharply than the Alpha and the Delta variants have. So, you know, the month of January is shaping up to be the epicenter of the storm, and by the time we begin to move into February, its effect may already be over the peak and beginning to decline. Can I rule out that further restrictions may yet be necessary? I'm afraid I can't. You know, 4 days is a very long period in the Omicron story, and on Monday, 4 days after we made our decisions yesterday, the Cabinet will meet again and will look at, for example, major events that are planned in Wales in the immediate post-Christmas period to see if they can and how they can go ahead safely. So I'm afraid there may be more things we will need to do as the evidence continues to emerge.
First Minister, diolch.
Diolch yn fawr. Over to Will Hayward at Wales Online.
Thank you, First Minister. Can I put to you one of the many comments our readers left on our stories last night after the nightclub announcement? One of them wrote, as we all know, the virus isn't going to go to pubs, theatres or football matches, but just to nightclubs. A lot of people have echoed this sentiment. Given that we're facing the most explosively transmissible form of COVID we've seen so far, which is quite capable of spreading in venues far less congested than nightclubs, is it really going to slow the virus? Can you explain exactly what you're trying to achieve with this one small change?
Well, we are focusing on a context where we think the risks are greatest. You know, people go to nightclubs to be up close and personal. It's the reason for the venue. And we know from other parts of the world that such venues have led to super spreader events. They were the last places to reopen when we were reopening the economy because they are the riskiest. And as we step back into more risky territory, I don't think it can be a surprise that they are the first that we have to ask to close again. I think you can distinguish between the reasons that people go to a restaurant and the reasons that people go to a nightclub. Of course it is not, because those other settings are guaranteed to be free of coronavirus, but it is a hierarchy of risk. You start with the most risky contexts and then see if you need to do more.
Thank you very much. You've criticised the lack of Treasury support. Can you explain exactly what you would do, COVID restrictions-wise, if you had the unwavering support of the Treasury?
Well, it's essentially to do with decisions that mean that people aren't able to be in work. The part of the help for business is that we cannot cover. We can't cover it financially, and we can't cover it practically either, is when you need to offer wage support for people who are temporarily unable to be in work, the furlough scheme, in other words. We don't have the money to do it, and the systems that you have to rely on in order to get the money to those people are systems that are in the hands of the UK government. They're not devolved. They belong to the HMRC and so on, which we don't have access to. So for those reasons, we are saying that the Treasury should be preparing now to be able to cover those costs if the economy has to be put on a footing where people aren't able to be in work while the Omicron wave comes over us and hopefully passes on so that places can reopen again. It's only ever been the Treasury able to mount help on that basis. Yesterday, the Social Partnership Forum of Wales met again. It's a forum that has the Welsh Government, trade unions, but crucially, private and public sector employers. And unanimously, the forum asked the Welsh Government to lobby the UK Government for a reintroduction of schemes like the furlough and self-employed schemes that we saw at earlier points in the crisis. So, you know, this is not the view of the Welsh Government alone. It was very definitely the collective view of the forum where employers and trade unions come together in Wales.
But has it stopped you doing anything at this point? Not having that Treasury support?
I'm willing to answer that third question again, Will, because I think I have answered it already in saying that the decisions we made so far can be covered from the £60 million that we have made available for the month of January. It's if we needed to go beyond that we would need Treasury support. So the things we've decided so far, we can manage to cover from our own resources. But if more significant measures were needed, that's when the money becomes a real issue. Well, diolch yn fawr, thank you very much. Over to Callum Metcalfe at 5 News.
Good afternoon, First Minister. Regarding the restrictions that are being brought into place on the 27th of December, why not bring them in now rather than waiting until after Christmas when people will be potentially mixing and gathering and spreading the Omicron variant?
Because we don't think it would be a proportionate thing to do in the context that we currently face in Wales. We have fewer Omicron cases in Wales than any other part of the United Kingdom, and very significantly fewer than we are seeing in London or in Scotland. Governments there have not introduced measures before Christmas, despite being in a more serious situation. As I've explained, for the next period up to Christmas, we believe we will still predominantly be dealing with the Delta variant. And had we been only dealing with Delta in Wales, we would have had a pretty straightforward pathway through to Christmas and into the new year. It's because we can see Omicron coming at us, behind our shoulder, the storm is gathering, that we have decided to take measures beyond Christmas. Up until Christmas, we think we can manage with the level of restrictions we currently have, plus that strong appeal to people in Wales to think very carefully and act safely in the run-up to Christmas.
Thank you, First Minister. And will you be putting any further restrictions on allowing people to come in and out of Wales in the new year?
Don't have any plans for doing that, Callum. When we had slower moving variants, then it was a plausible course of action to try to contain the spread of the variant from high prevalence areas to low prevalence areas. With Omicron, where the spread is so fast, I think it simply wouldn't be an effective measure. So we are not contemplating that. Thank you very much. Draw I Thomas Evans, S4C.
Diolch yn fawr i chi, Prif Weinidog, pnawn da. Daeth cadarnhad ddoe gan Gyngor Sir Powys na fydde ysgolion yno yn dychwelyd i ddysgu wyneb yn wyneb tan y 10fed o Ionawr. Ydy hi'n realistig na fydd ysgolion ar draws Cymru yn dychwelyd i ddysgu wyneb yn wyneb am wythnosau cyntaf y tymor nesaf? Mae'r Gweinidog Addysg wedi gofyn iddyn nhw baratoi at hynny. Ydych chi'n meddwl mai dyna fydd yn digwydd?
Wel, diolch yn fawr, Thomas. Wel, ar hyn o bryd, dyna beth ni wedi ofyn i'r ysgolion i wneud. Ysgrifennodd Jeremy Miles fel Gweinidog dros addysg masg i'r pennaeth a'r ysgolion ni ar dydd Mercher i ddweud ni'n rhoi y 2 diwrnod gyntaf yn y tymor newydd iddyn nhw i paratoi am y dyfodol yn y cyd-destun lleol mae'n nhw'n wynebu. Mae'r llythyr yn ddweud mae'n pwysig iddyn nhw paratoi am mwy nag un dyfodol. Ar un ochr, i paratoi am cario mlaen gyda disgyblion yn y dosbarth, wyneb a wyneb, ac i roi pethau yn ei le i helpu hwnna i para mlaen mewn ffordd ddiogel. Ond hefyd mae'r llythyr yn ddweud mae'n pwysig i'r ysgolion paratoi os bydd rhaid i nhw symud nôl i roi addysg ar-lein i bobl ifanc. Dyna pam ni wedi rhoi y 2 diwrnod i helpu ysgolion i paratoi, ac ar hyn o bryd, dwi'n meddwl mae hwnna'n resymol ac yn rhoi cyfleon i bobl yn y cyd-destun lleol i wneud y penderfyniadau sydd addas iddyn nhw. Thomas asked me about the fact that Powys schools are not going to reopen until the 10th of January, and was it our expectation that other schools may not open for the first week of term? And I confirm that the Education Minister, Jeremy Miles, wrote to all head teachers on Wednesday of this week, saying that the first 2 days of the new school term should now be devoted to planning and preparation, that schools should plan on 2 bases. First of all, that if they are able to carry on with face-to-face learning, that they should put in place the measures that allow that to happen safely, but that they will also need to contemplate what they would need to do if teaching had, for a short time, to be moved back into virtual learning, online teaching. And I think allowing people to make those preparations in the local context, knowing what they will know about the nature of their local population, the extent to which staff are available and so on, is the right way to approach all of this, and providing those 2 days in order to allow people to make those plans and those preparations, I think, puts the decision in the hands of the people who are best able to do it within the framework that we have set down for Wales nationally.
Felly, i gadarnhau, ych chi ddim yn rhagweld y bydd yna gyfyngiadau i ysgolion i symud i ddysgu ar-lein ar draws Cymru, bydd yn fater lleol? Ie, greu, diolch. Ac un cwestiwn arall ys gai. Unwaith eto, mae Llywodraeth Cymru wedi symud ar adeg wahanol i lywodraethau eraill y Deyrnas Unedig oherwydd y cyd-destun gwahanol. Felly, pam ydych chi'n gwrthwynebu cael ymchwiliad cyhoeddus annibynnol i'r pandemig yma yng Nghymru a fydde'n canolbwyntio ar benderfyniadau sydd wedi gwneud gan Llywodraeth yma yng Nghymru?
Wel, jyst yn bod yn glir, dwi ddim yn erbyn ymchwil annibynnol. Dwi'n awyddus dros ben i cael ymchwil annibynnol sy'n gallu rhoi yr atebion mae bobl yng Nghymru yn eisiau gael eu cwestiynau maen nhw'n codi. Y ddadl yw y ffordd gorau i wneud hynny. Dwi ddim yn meddwl mae ymchwil sydd jyst yn ganolbwyntio ar beth sydd wedi digwydd yng Nghymru heb gallu cael y penderfyniadau yna yn y cyd-destun ehanga. Nifer fawr o penderfyniadau sydd wedi cael ei wneud yng Nghymru yn dibynnu ar beth oedd mynd ymlaen dros y Deyrnas Unedig i gyd. Ni wedi clywed yr enw y person sy'n mynd i arwain yr ymchwil annibynnol ar lefel y Deyrnas Unedig nawr, a mae hi'n rhywun profiadol. Mae hi wedi gwneud gwaith pwysig yn cyd-destun datganoli hefyd, ac oeddwn ni'n falch i weld beth wedodd y Prif Weinidog Boris Johnson pan oedd e'n cyhoeddi ar enw am y rôl i'r llywodraethau datganoli i cyfrannu at y gwaith mae'r ymchwil yn mynd i wneud. Dwi'n dal i fod mewn cysylltu gyda'r gweinidogion yn Deyrnas Unedig i ddweud y pethau sy'n pwysig i bobl yng Nghymru i weld yn y ffordd bydd yr ymchwil yn mynd at y gwaith pwysig sydd iddyn nhw i wneud. Thomas was asking me about the debate about whether a Wales-specific inquiry would be a better way of getting answers that people want to the decisions that were made here in Wales. And I just confirmed that my own view remains that people will get the answers they are looking for in the best way through an independent inquiry that is able both to look at decisions that were made here in Wales, but also to put them in that wider UK context. The chair of that inquiry has now been announced. I think that the person appointed has a very strong track record of work of this sort, and I was particularly glad that she comes to the work having carried out a very important inquiry in Northern Ireland. So she comes to the work with a very strong sense of the devolved nature of the United Kingdom. And I was pleased to see that in the statements put out by the UK government, a commitment to involve directly devolved governments in setting the terms of reference for the inquiry. And I know that there are important things that families who have lost loved ones in Wales will look to see in that inquiry, and I will continue to represent those views to the UK government in order that we can secure an inquiry that gives them the answers they are looking for, but sets the decisions made in Wales in the only way I believe you can fully understand them, by putting them in that wider UK context. Thomas, diolch yn fawr. Draw I Dan Bevan, LBC. Over to Dan Bevan at LBC.
Thank you, First Minister. Good afternoon to you. As you've already alluded to, nightclubs closing, however, they were the last ones to reopen, the last types of businesses to reopen, and that's after mandating COVID passes at the point of entry. So doesn't this show, considering that was a measure to keep them open, that COVID passes don't work to reduce infection, and are you planning to rethink the way that they're used here?
Dan, I think in the Delta context, which was the context in which COVID passes were introduced, they have been a very useful measure, and they have helped to keep businesses open and to give customers confidence that they were safe locations for them to visit. What has changed is not the COVID pass, it is the nature of the threat. And the nature of the threat is no longer the Delta variant, but the very fast-moving, highly transmissible Omicron variant that is coming here to Wales. It is in that context that we have concluded that for nightclubs, COVID passes and all the other things, which I fully recognise the sector had itself put in place, that package of measures is not sufficient to protect people from the Omicron wave that is coming our way. That is what has changed, not the pass itself.
So if I could follow up, First Minister, on that just before my second question, what does this mean then for COVID passes once the next wave is, we're on the other side of it?
I think COVID passes will have a part to play the other side of this wave as an exit strategy. You know, as we see the wave diminish, COVID passes may be part of the way in which we can reopen some parts of the economy. So I don't think that the usefulness of COVID passes has gone away. And you will have seen, Dan, that the UK government itself has now introduced a COVID pass very much on the Welsh model. So I think they will continue to be part of the repertoire of things we need to have in place, albeit that the part they play will be different as the nature of the threat changes.
Thank you. And taking into account the precautionary message that you've had for people over Christmas and asking them to take extra steps, and particularly if they're seeing people who are vulnerable, is this Christmas safe now? You're not going to add any new restrictions for Christmas Day, like restricting the number of households who are going to be around the dinner table?
Not intending to do that, Dan. I think, we have a set of quite simple messages here in Wales, and I think simplicity helps in people, getting a sense of what we're asking them to do. So making sure you're vaccinated if you've keeping that appointment when you get it, a lateral flow test before you go out, thinking about people who are vulnerable, meeting outdoors if you can, doing all those other things about mask wearing and hand washing and social distancing. That's the package of measures that we believe can keep us all safe in the run-up to Christmas, and we're not intending to alter that package over the few days that remain between now and Christmas and Boxing Day. I'm going to go to Harry Hansen at That's TV. Thanks very much, Dan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Minister. You've announced today that £60 million will be made available to help businesses through these new restrictions. But how is this going to be distributed fairly and practically? Will local authorities be needed?
I think it's quite likely that local authorities will play a part in it. They have up until now, and very successfully. Sadly, because the public health emergency has gone on for as long as it has, we've had a series of dates during it which we have had to find more money to support businesses. So this is not the first time we're doing it. We've got a lot of experience of doing it. The people who are involved are working hard today. I know I've had messages already this morning about some of the work they're doing to make that money available as quickly and effectively as we can, drawing on all that experience that we've built up over the time of the public health emergency.
Thank you. And another point really on the booster rollout. There's been a statement by Swansea Bay University Health Board, and they've expressed concerns that there are people on the housebound list who won't be able to get a booster vaccine because of a shortage of staff. So are the government concerned about this, and has there been conversations around this?
Well, of course, we have 3 times as many people asking to be vaccinated at home in the booster campaign as we did during the original campaigns. So there are a lot more people looking to have the booster at home. And, it is a very labour-intensive way of providing the vaccine. But what we have done in very recent days is quite significantly to increase the amount of money that we are providing to GPs to do home vaccination. And we hope that that will mean that we will have more of their time available to do this part of the vaccination programme, because they are in many ways amongst the best suited to do it, and that will then allow us to get out and vaccinate people in their own homes in the way that we need. It does depend upon a workforce that is very stretched, very tired, and where we keep asking more of them to come forward and help us with that. And, you know, I understand the anxieties of health boards and what we're asking of that workforce, but we are, you know, as I say, we've significantly increased the financial side of the investment we are making in order to try and draw that extra capacity into that part of the vaccination effort. Harry, thank you very much. And finally for today, to Tom Magner at Carers World.
Thank you very much indeed, First Minister. Last Friday, I asked you about calls by Cardiff and Vale University Health Board for unpaid carers to do even more to help out with the shortage of paid care workers. Since then, I've discovered that a further four health boards have leapt on the bandwagon, so to speak. What steps will you take personally to intervene to halt what appears to be a rolling campaign, which, even if meant unintentionally, will drive our audience of unpaid carers further into situations that they tell me are both depressing and intolerable?
Well, Tom, I don't intend to intervene to prevent health boards from looking to get extra help where people are able and prepared to offer it. That was the point I remember trying to make last week. I don't want anybody to feel that they are being pressured to provide more, but nor do I want to prevent health boards from appealing to people who may be in a position and who may be willing to play an extra part in helping the health service to deal with the enormous additional load that it is facing because of the current crisis. So, you know, I'll repeat that really. I don't expect any health board to act in a way that makes people feel that they're being put under improper pressure, but I don't think it's unfair for health boards to ask people who are willing to help to do that.
Thank you. On this issue, it is now reaching the point where Carers Wales have responded by saying it's putting intolerable pressure on already struggling unpaid carers. No matter what the intention, and you know, I do understand what you're saying about, you know, health boards not putting pressure on people, but aren't they inadvertently putting pressure on people? Because unpaid carers, by and large, are, you know, do their absolute best to help as best they can in all circumstances. So it's subtle pressure, isn't it?
Well, look, I do understand that point. If you are appealing to people whose whole history and natural instinct is to want to help, then sometimes people who are very stretched will still feel that they ought to see whether they could dig deeper still. So I'm not saying that I do not see the risk that there is there, that people who ought not to feel that will feel it because of the sort of person that they are. But my message to health boards and to those people is that this is not an appeal that is meant to make anybody feel that they are being toppled over into doing more than they can possibly be asked to do. It is aimed at some other people who may have some additional capacity and who would be prepared to put that at the disposal of the system at a point when the system is under the very, very significant pressure that it is under, and to do it in a way that will help some other people to be able to go on managing in the, you know, in the astonishing way that they have shown they are able to manage, even under the terrific stresses and strains that coronavirus has placed in their lives.
Thank you.
Tom, can I offer them and you the very best wishes for the Christmas period ahead?
And thank you, and also from our audience to you, to your to you as First Minister and your ministerial team and all the officials behind, a heartfelt happy Christmas to you all. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you all very much indeed.